Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Bridget. Today I want to focus on something that occurred on October 30th, 1938, when a young Orson Welles performed a radio show that would eventually become a very enduring bit of American lore. I'm of course talking about the War of the Worlds. You already knew that if you looked at my video title. But I decided I wanted to learn a little bit more about it because all I've really known is that there was widespread panic because people had missed the disclaimer at the beginning of the show explaining that it was a theatrical performance. So today I'm going to start by actually listening to the entire recording, which I've never done before. And then we are going to hop in the car and go to Grover's Mill, New Jersey, which is the setting of Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds. So let's go. I've got my heated blanket, I've got my coffee, and I'm going to try to put myself in the mental state of someone from the 1930s. It's easy to laugh at the idea of a radio drama causing widespread panic, but that's in hindsight, because back in the 1930s, the idea of corroborating a news bulletin would be very difficult. Okay, I am pulling up what promises to be the complete broadcast, so here we go.
The Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
Okay, so imagine not hearing that disclaimer that this is a radio show performed by Orson Welles.
Earlier reports received from American observatories. Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
So if you hadn't heard that initial introduction of what it is we're listening to, I can totally see how at first you would think that it was a regular news bulletin. The stuff at the very beginning all sounded legit. Talking to Professor Pearson at an observatory in Princeton, it all sounded real. The only thing I started noticing throughout was that the time frames all seemed a little bit too close together in order for it to be live. Like, it didn't make sense that in one scene we are with Professor Pearson in the observatory in Princeton, and then within a few moments we are at Grover's Mill with Professor Pearson looking at what's going on. I think there were a lot of elements of really great storytelling and suspense building. Like, some scenes just instantly got cut off, so you don't know what happened to that group of people who had been talking. So they did a great job sort of building the tension. At basically the height of all the pandemonium that's broken out, at 38 minutes or 39 minutes, it stops and it cuts to someone saying, "You are listening to a radio show, blah, blah, blah." So there's that other disclaimer. So in case people were actually starting to feel terrified, you heard that disclaimer. And my favorite thing, which I didn't know happened, is at the very end, Orson Welles reintroduces himself out of character, and he says this amazing outro, if you will, where he says, "None of this happened. It's all essentially in the spirit of Halloween." Because if you remember, this was performed on October 30th, 1938. So the next day was Halloween.
So goodbye, everybody, and remember, please, for the next day or so, the terrible lesson you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch, and if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, that was no Martian, it's Halloween.
So it's this really nice, thanks for tuning in. We had a lot of fun, but don't be alarmed by this. It's just all in good fun. So I thought that was really cool, and I love Halloween, so. It's so cool to be able to say, yes, I've heard the entirety of Orson Welles' performance of The War of the Worlds, because it's one of, if not the most famous American broadcast of all time. I honestly don't know of any other famous broadcasts other than like FDR's Fireside Chats. I think we've all sort of grown up knowing the idea of War of the Worlds, Orson Welles, but to actually listen to the whole thing is really cool. So I encourage all of you to take the time, less than an hour, listen to it start to finish, so you too can say that you've listened to it. So we know about this widespread panic, this mass hysteria that the War of the Worlds caused. But what we haven't talked about yet is how that may be very, very exaggerated. So apparently, C.E. Hooper was a company that measured radio ratings. And the night of the broadcast, they called 5,000 people to survey what they were listening to, if anything. Only 2% of the 5,000 people said they were listening to this War of the Worlds program, or the Orson Welles program. So that indicates that a very small portion of the population was actually listening. What I don't know from my research is how many people would have had the ability to listen to this radio broadcast. Because 2% of 5,000 is just 100 households, but if there were like 10 million people who were able to listen to it, then that's still a high number. So if anyone knows the answer to this, please let me know in the comments. But regardless, it was not the most popular thing on the radio that night. Some people had their radios off, but the majority of people were listening to a very famous variety show that was playing up against War of the Worlds. Edgar Bergen's Chase and Sanborn Hour. The thing is, though, at one point there was a musical interlude, and during that musical interlude, people would have been turning their dials, you know, seeing what else is on, and that is when a lot of people may have happened upon the War of the Worlds. And having missed the initial disclaimer, hey, this is a radio drama of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, having missed that, these people would be going in, hearing some music, and then start hearing these news bulletins come in. The problem is we don't know and cannot calculate how many people made that switch. How many people may have just turned the radios off. So that number is simply unknowable. Right now, we are going to go to Grover's Mill, which is where this whole thing supposedly took place, where the Martians crash landed. So we are looking for some sort of plaque that supposedly exists that commemorates the War of the Worlds, but we didn't see it on our first drive-by, so we are going to U-turn. That's so funny.
We just U-turned in this place, and then we see this sign. U-turn 75 cents.
That's pretty funny. So this monument plaque thing is in a park. It's called Van Nest Park. So we just pulled in. It's kind of chilly. Oh, I see it. This whole place is muddy. You know, looking around, I kind of wonder why they chose Grover's Mill. Or maybe the reason is because it is such a small town and you wouldn't really pin this as a place for, you know, an alien invasion to occur. So it makes it seem that much more real. We have to traverse this to get to that. Okay, I'm just gonna go around. Wow. This is pretty cool. So you've got your invaders. You've got Orson Welles performing. October 30th, 1938, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. You can see the fear on their faces. And this little thing here, I'll read it to you. On the evening of October 30th, 1938, Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater presented a dramatization of H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, as adapted by Howard Koch. This was to become a landmark in broadcasting history, provoking continuing thought about media responsibility, social psychology, and civil defense. For a brief time, as many as 1 million people throughout the country believed that Martians had invaded the Earth, beginning with Grover's Mill, New Jersey, dedicated to the citizens of West Windsor on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the War of the Worlds broadcast, October 29th, 1988. So this says 1 million. I've read a lot of different numbers. Right next to the plaque is this little pathway, and there are all these signs. I'm blocking all of them. All of these signs about War of the Worlds. In 1938, there were no televisions or cell phones. People gathered around their radios for news and entertainment. America was just coming out of the Great Depression, and Adolf Hitler had recently ascended into power in Germany. A threat of another world had Americans on edge. I apologize for the sound of geese, but it seems we are surrounded. My God, these freaking geese. What are they doing? Didn't they just go that way? Why are they coming back? Here's the famous picture of Orson Welles. This says, the front page of the New York Times on the following day had the story of the broadcast with the headline, "Radio Listeners in Panic, Taking War Drama as Fact." The story told of responses throughout the country, including thousands of persons calling the police, seeking advice on protective measures. In Newark, in a single block at Hedden Terrace, more than 20 families rushed out of their houses with wet handkerchiefs and towels over their faces. In Indianapolis, a woman ran into a church screaming, "New York destroyed, it's the end of the world, you might as well go home to die. I just heard it on the radio." Wow. Legend has it that locally, some residents opened fire on a water tower, thinking it was a Martian. In the days following the broadcast, a public outcry arose, but the station maintained that listeners were reminded throughout the broadcast that it was only a performance. The Mercury Theater escaped punishment, and CBS had to promise never again to use the "we interrupt this program" format in fictional entertainment. The story of the War of the Worlds and this widespread panic grew with each retelling, and scholars believe it has to do with the war that was happening between radio and the newspaper. Because at that time, radio was growing more and more popular and stealing ad revenue, essentially, from the newspapers. With this performance of the War of the Worlds and this supposed panic that happened, newspapers used this as a gleaming example of why radio could not be trusted. This was a radio drama made to sound like real news, and people didn't know any better. So newspapers were trying to show that radio was mismanaged, couldn't be trusted, because newspapers were banking on it taking down radio, or at least causing enough doubt so that people wouldn't trust radio so much. And that's why scholars say this story of this mass hysteria got bigger and bigger and more exaggerated. There were suicides, there were miscarriages, people died of heart attacks. In one article I read from not that long ago, people tried to fact check this, and they could not find a single substantiated instance of anyone dying from a heart attack due to this, no suicides due to this, or anything. So, you be the judge. People like to use Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds as a sort of cautionary tale about how much power media has over our lives. And could this happen again? I know in the 1940s in Quito, Ecuador, they replicated this and it caused widespread pandemonium. Even the police were terrified and they started going to investigate and fight the aliens. But the 1940s isn't all that different from the 1930s. And in Buffalo, in 1968, it happened again. This War of the Worlds thing was replicated. And a lot of people were very upset because it worked. When I first considered this, I was like, of course this couldn't happen again. You would just change the channel or go to a different news source, or you would go on Twitter and see if other people are talking about it. But if someone were to try to replicate something like this in 2020 or in present day, they would probably take into account the fact that we look on Twitter or something to corroborate. So they would probably start by planting people on Twitter or planting things ahead of time. Like the Blair Witch Project. I remember reading on IMDb that people were missing. So when you're researching the film, you go to IMDb and you say, oh my God, those people actually are missing. So you go into the theater being like, this is definitely real because you took the time to do your research. The filmmakers knew you were going to do that and they set this up ahead of time. So I'm not so sure this couldn't happen again. What do you think? That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next time.